The day started like any other for Emma Carter, a quiet and thoughtful woman in her late 20s. She had spent the weekend visiting her estranged father, Arthur Langley, a man she hadn't seen in years due to unresolved tensions between them. Though their meeting wasn't perfect, it gave her some closure. Now, as she boarded Flight 347 from Chicago to Miami, she felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Little did she know this flight would change everything, not just for her but for everyone on board. Emma found her seat near the window and settled in with a book, hoping to pass the time quietly. The passenger beside her, Jack Thompson, seemed unremarkable at first glance. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with short-cropped hair and a slight stubble. His clothes were simple, jeans and a faded leather jacket, but there was something about him that caught Emma's attention. Maybe it was the way he carried himself, or maybe it was the distant look in his eyes, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Whatever it was, Emma couldn't quite put her finger on it. As the plane taxied down the runway and lifted into the air, the hum of engines filled the cabin. Passengers chatted softly, babies cried briefly before being soothed by their parents, and flight attendants moved up and down the aisles offering snacks and drinks. Everything seemed normal, at least for the first hour of the flight. Then came the moment that turned routine into chaos. It began subtly. A loud thud echoed through the cockpit door, followed by muffled voices. At first, no one paid much attention. Turbulence often caused odd noises. But then an announcement crackled over the intercom, breaking the calm atmosphere. The voice belonged to one of the flight attendants, shaky and urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "we need your assistance immediately. If anyone on board has aviation experience, please come forward." A wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin as passengers exchanged confused glances. Some looked worried, while others tried to brush off the request as a minor issue. But Emma noticed something alarming. The flight attendant standing near the front of the plane looked pale, almost panicked. Her hands trembled as she scanned the rows of faces, searching for someone who could help. Jack sat frozen in his seat, staring straight ahead. Emma glanced at him curiously, wondering why he hadn't reacted yet. Was he ignoring the call? Or was he simply too absorbed in his thoughts to notice? Just as she opened her mouth to speak, Jack suddenly leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His jaw tightened and his breathing became shallow. For a brief moment, Emma thought he might be having second thoughts, or worse, experiencing some kind of medical issue himself. But then, without warning, Jack stood up. His movements were slow and deliberate, as though he were weighing every step. When he finally reached the aisle, the flight attendant rushed toward him, her face etched with desperation. "Do you have experience?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack hesitated, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I used to fly planes," he admitted reluctantly. "But that was years ago. I'm not sure I can—" "You're our best chance," the flight attendant interrupted, cutting him off mid-sentence. "The pilot, he's unconscious. We don't know what happened, but we need someone to take control now." Emma watched the exchange with growing concern. Who was this man sitting next to her? What secrets was he hiding beneath his reserved exterior? As Jack followed the flight attendant toward the cockpit, she realized she didn't even know his name. Yet here he was, stepping up in a crisis when everyone else, including herself, had stayed seated. The rest of the passengers whispered nervously as they waited for news. Some clutched rosaries or prayed silently, while others held on to their loved ones tightly. Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. She had always been afraid of flying, but this was beyond anything she'd ever imagined. Would they make it out alive? And if they did, how would she ever repay the stranger who had risked his life for hers? Minutes ticked by like hours. Finally, Jack emerged from the cockpit, escorted by another crew member. His expression was grim, but determined. As he walked back to his seat, Emma studied him closely. There was a newfound intensity in his gaze, as though he had shed whatever doubts or fears had been holding him back earlier. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain. Jack wasn't going to give up without a fight. For the first time since boarding the flight, Emma allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. This man, whoever he was, had taken charge in a situation where most people would have crumbled under pressure. Whether it was bravery, instinct, or sheer necessity driving him, Emma didn't care. All that mattered was that someone was willing to try, and that someone was sitting right beside her. Jack sat back in his seat, his hands gripping the armrests tightly. The weight of what he had just agreed to do pressed down on him like a ton of bricks. He wasn't sure if he could pull this off. Sure, he had flown planes before, fighter jets, no less, but that was years ago, during his time in the military. Landing a commercial airliner full of passengers was an entirely different beast. His heart pounded in his chest as doubt crept into his mind. What if he made a mistake? What if he couldn't handle it? Emma, sensing his unease, leaned closer. "You'll be okay," she said softly, her voice steady despite the fear she felt herself. Her words were simple, but they carried a kind of quiet confidence that surprised even her. She didn't know Jack well enough to understand why she believed in him so strongly, but something about the way he carried himself told her he wasn't the type to give up easily. Jack turned to look at her, his brow furrowed. For a moment their eyes locked and Emma saw something flicker in his gaze, a mix of determination and vulnerability. It was as though he was silently thanking her for those few words of encouragement. Then, with a deep breath, he nodded slightly and stood up again. This time he moved with purpose, heading straight toward the cockpit without hesitation. Inside the cockpit, the scene was chaotic. The co-pilot lay slumped in his seat, unconscious, while the captain was sprawled across the controls, barely breathing. The flight attendants hovered nearby, unsure of what to do next. One of them handed Jack a headset, explaining that air traffic control was already guiding them through emergency protocols. Jack slipped the headset over his ears and took a seat, his fingers hovering nervously over the unfamiliar controls. "Flight 347, can you hear me?" came the calm but urgent voice of an air traffic controller. "We need you to stabilize the aircraft first. Can you confirm your altitude and heading?" Jack swallowed hard, trying to push aside the panic rising in his throat. He glanced at the instruments, recognizing some of them from his days in the military. Altitude, speed, fuel levels. It all came rushing back to him, though not as quickly as he would have liked. Yeah, he replied, his voice shaky. "Altitude is 35,000 feet, heading south-southeast." "Good job," the controller said, his tone reassuring. "Now we're going to walk you through slowing the plane down. You're doing great so far." Great? Jack thought bitterly. If only they knew how close he was to losing it completely. But there was no room for self-doubt now. Lives depended on him, including Emma's. That thought alone kept him grounded, forcing him to focus on the task at hand. Back in the cabin, Emma watched anxiously as the plane began to dip slightly, sending a ripple of panic through the passengers. A child started crying and someone gasped loudly. The turbulence wasn't helping either, making it clear that Jack was struggling to maintain control. Yet amidst the chaos, Emma noticed something remarkable. Despite the obvious challenges, the plane seemed to be stabilizing little by little. Whoever this man was, he clearly knew more than he let on. As Jack worked diligently in the cockpit, memories of his past flooded his mind. He thought about his time in the Army, piloting fighter jets over hostile territories. Those missions had been dangerous, yes, but they were also structured. There were rules, procedures, and backup systems in place. Here, however, he was flying blind, relying solely on instructions from people miles away who couldn't see what he was dealing with firsthand. Still, he pushed forward, following the controller's guidance step by step. "Okay, reduce throttle." "Gradually," the voice instructed. "We need to bring your speed down to 200 knots. Jack adjusted the throttle carefully, keeping one eye on the instrument panel and the other on the horizon outside the windshield. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he ignored it, focusing instead on maintaining balance. Slowly, but surely, the plane began to respond, leveling out as its speed decreased. Meanwhile, Emma found herself praying silently, not just for her own safety, but for Jack's too. She didn't know much about him, but she knew he was risking everything to save them, and strangely she felt a connection to him, as if fate had placed him beside her for a reason. Maybe it was gratitude, or maybe it was something deeper. Either way, she couldn't shake the feeling that their lives were intertwined now, whether they liked it or not. The intercom crackled again, and the captain's voice returned. "Flight 347, you're looking good. We've cleared a runway for you at Miami International. Prepare for descent once you reach 10,000 feet. Jack exhaled sharply, allowing himself a moment of relief. They weren't out of the woods yet, but at least they were making progress. Descending, however, posed its own set of challenges. Commercial planes required precision landings, especially under stressful conditions. Could he really pull it off? He glanced at the co-pilot's seat where the young man still lay unconscious. Guilt tugged at him briefly. He wished there was someone else here to share the burden. But wishing wouldn't change anything. It was up to him, and him alone, to get these people safely to the ground. Back in the cabin, Emma gripped the armrest tightly as the plane began its descent. The turbulence intensified, causing stomach-churning drops that sent screams echoing through the cabin. Despite the terror around her, Emma forced herself to stay calm. She reminded herself that Jack was in charge, and somehow, she trusted him to see them through. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the plane drew closer to the airport. Through the window, Emma caught glimpses of the city below, its lights twinkling like stars against the darkening sky. It was beautiful, almost surreal, given the circumstances. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine walking off, the plane alive, hugging her father goodbye after patching things up between them. But then reality snapped back, reminding her that survival wasn't guaranteed. Not yet. In the cockpit, Jack braced himself for the final stretch. "Approaching runway 27 right," the controller announced. "You're lined up perfectly. Just ease back on the throttle and lower the landing gear when you're ready." Jack's hands trembled as he reached for the lever. Lowering, the landing gear was a critical step, and failure here could mean disaster. With bated breath, he flipped the switch, listening intently for the familiar hum of hydraulics. When the green light illuminated on the dashboard, signaling that the wheels were down, he let out a shaky sigh of relief. "Gear down and locked," he confirmed, his voice steadier now. Preparing for touchdown. The runway loomed ahead, bathed in bright white lights. Jack adjusted the flaps, slowing the plane further as he aimed for the center line. His training kicked in fully now, overriding his nerves. This was it. The moment of truth. Passengers held their breath as the plane descended rapidly, its tires screeching against the pavement upon impact. For a split second, it seemed as though they might skid off course, but Jack managed to correct the trajectory, bringing the massive aircraft to a smooth stop near the terminal. Cheers erupted throughout the cabin as reality sank in. They had made it. Against all odds, they were alive. Emma covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face as relief washed over her. She glanced toward the cockpit, wanting desperately to thank the man who had saved them all. Unbeknownst to her, Jack sat motionless in the pilot's seat, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had done it. Somehow he had landed the plane. But as the adrenaline wore off, he realized the enormity of what he had accomplished, and the lives he had touched in the process. The plane came to a complete stop, its engines winding down as the cabin erupted in cheers and applause. Passengers hugged one another, tears streaming down their faces as relief washed over them. Some clapped rhythmically, chanting, "Hero," while others simply sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. The tension that had gripped everyone for the past hour finally began to loosen, replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Jack remained in the cockpit, his hands still gripping the controls even though the plane was safely on the ground. His heart raced, not from fear anymore, but from sheer exhaustion. Every muscle in his body felt like it had been wrung dry, and his mind buzzed with fragments of memories, flashes of turbulence, frantic instructions from air traffic control, and the deafening roar of the engines as he fought to keep the plane steady. It was surreal. He had done it. Somehow he had landed a commercial airliner full of people without proper training or preparation. But now that the adrenaline was fading, doubt crept back in. Did he really deserve their praise? Or was he just lucky? A soft knock on the cockpit door snapped him out of his thoughts. One of the flight attendants peeked inside, her face glowing, with relief and admiration. "You did it," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're safe because of you." Jack forced a weak smile, unsure of how to respond. "It wasn't just me," he muttered, gesturing toward the unconscious co-pilot slumped in the other seat. "I had help. From you, from air traffic control. I couldn't have done this alone." The flight attendant shook her head firmly. "Maybe so, but you were the one who stepped up when no one else could. That makes you a hero, whether you believe it or not." Before Jack could argue further, the door opened wider, and passengers began filing into the cockpit, eager to express their gratitude. They crowded around him, shaking his hand, patting him on the shoulder, and thanking him profusely. A mother, holding her young son, stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You saved my baby's life." Jack swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the outpouring of emotion. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had been thrown into a nightmare and somehow managed to wake up alive. Yet seeing the genuine appreciation in their eyes made it impossible to dismiss their words entirely. These people weren't just strangers. They were survivors, bound together by a shared brush with death. And somehow they saw him as the reason they were still breathing. As the crowd dispersed, paramedics arrived to tend to the unconscious pilots and escort everyone off the plane. Jack lingered behind, watching as passengers disembarked, many pausing to thank him once more before stepping onto the jet bridge. Emma was among the last to leave. She stood at the cockpit entrance, hesitating for a moment before approaching him. "You did it," she said softly, her green eyes shining with unshed tears. "You saved all of us." Jack looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone else would have done," he replied gruffly. "Nothing special." Emma shook her head, refusing to let him downplay his actions. "No, Jack, not everyone would have stepped up like you did. You risked your life for people you didn't even know. That's incredible." Her use of his name caught him off guard. He hadn't realized she knew it until now. "How do you know my name?" he asked, frowning slightly. "The flight attendant mentioned it earlier," she explained with a small smile. "I'm Emma, by the way. We were sitting next to each other." Jack nodded slowly, piecing things together. So this was the woman whose quiet presence had calmed him during those terrifying moments in the air. She had been there beside him since the beginning, offering words of encouragement when he needed them most. Now, standing face to face with her, he noticed details he hadn't before: the warmth in her smile, the kindness in her gaze, the strength hidden beneath her gentle demeanor. "I guess I owe you a thanks too," he admitted reluctantly. "Your words back there, they helped more than you know." Emma tilted her head, surprised. "What words?" "When you told me I'd be okay," he said, his voice quieter now. "It meant something. Kept me going." Her cheeks flushed faintly at the compliment, and she glanced down at her feet, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm just glad I could help. Even if it was only a little bit." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they'd been through hanging between them. Finally, Emma broke the quiet. "Well, I should probably go. My dad will be waiting for me." "Dad?" Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. "You mentioned him earlier, right? Something about patching things up?" Emma hesitated, debating how much to share. "Yeah, we haven't always seen eye to eye, but after this, I think we're starting to understand each other better." Jack nodded thoughtfully, sensing that there was more to the story than she was letting on. Still, he didn't press her. Everyone had their own battles to fight, their own wounds to heal. If today had taught him anything, it was that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about finding meaning in the chaos connecting with others, and learning to move forward despite the odds. As Emma turned to leave, she paused and looked back at him. "Hey, Jack." "Yeah?" "If you ever need someone to talk to, or if you just want to grab coffee sometime, I'd like that." Jack blinked, taken aback by the unexpected invitation. For a moment he considered declining. After all, he wasn't used to forming connections with people. But something about Emma's sincerity made him reconsider. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to let someone in for a change. "I'd like that too," he said finally, managing a small smile. "Thanks, Emma." With that, she disappeared down the jet bridge, leaving Jack alone in the cockpit. As the reality of what had happened settled over him, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Today had been the most terrifying experience of his life, but it had also been strangely transformative. In saving others, he had rediscovered a part of himself he thought he'd lost, a sense of purpose, of belonging. And maybe, just maybe, he had found something or someone worth fighting for. Outside, reporters and news crews swarmed the terminal, eager to capture footage of the heroic passenger who had landed the plane. Jack groaned inwardly at the thought of facing cameras and microphones, but he knew there was no avoiding it. This story wasn't just about him. It belonged to everyone on that flight, a testament to human resilience and courage in the face of adversity. As he stepped off the plane and into the spotlight, he reminded himself of one thing: heroes aren't born, they're made. And sometimes all it takes is a single act of bravery to change the course of your life, and the lives of those around you, forever. Jack stepped off the plane into a sea of flashing lights and shouting voices. Reporters jostled for position, thrusting microphones toward him while cameras clicked incessantly. He blinked against the glare, feeling like he'd walked straight into a storm. For someone who preferred solitude, this sudden attention was overwhelming. Questions came at him from every direction. How did you manage to land the plane? Were you scared? Do you have any aviation training? He raised a hand awkwardly, trying to shield himself from the barrage. I'm not really comfortable talking about this right now, he said, his voice firm but polite. Yet the reporters weren't deterred. They pressed closer, their curiosity insatiable. Jack took a deep breath, reminding himself that these people were only doing their jobs. Still, he couldn't help but feel like an imposter. Hero? That wasn't a label he felt he deserved. A representative from the airline finally intervened, guiding Jack away from the chaos and into a private lounge where officials waited to debrief him. The room was quiet compared to the frenzy outside, though the air buzzed with tension. Airline executives, government representatives, and even members of the National Transportation Safety Board sat around a large table, eager to hear his account of the incident. Jack recounted the events as best he could, explaining how he had relied on his military experience and instructions from air traffic control to stabilize the aircraft and execute the landing. His answers were concise, almost mechanical, as if he were reciting facts rather than reliving the most harrowing moment of his life. When the questioning ended, one of the executives stood up and extended his hand. On behalf of everyone here and all those passengers, you have our deepest gratitude. What you did today was extraordinary. Jack shook the man's hand reluctantly, still uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what needed to be done, he replied, his tone measured. Anyone else in my position would have tried to do the same. The executive smiled warmly. Perhaps, but not everyone would have succeeded. You saved over 200 lives today, Mr. Thompson. Don't underestimate the impact of that. Despite his discomfort, Jack couldn't deny the sincerity in the man's words. He nodded silently, accepting the compliment without argument. As the meeting concluded, he was ushered out of the lounge and back into the public eye. This time, however, the crowd had grown larger. Passengers from Flight 347 had gathered near the terminal exit, many holding signs that read, "Thank you, Jack," and "Our hero." Some clapped, while others cheered loudly, their gratitude palpable. Emma stood near the front of the group, her arms crossed loosely over her chest as she watched Jack approach. She hadn't left the airport yet, unable to tear herself away after witnessing the aftermath of the emergency. Seeing him now, surrounded by adoration and applause, she felt a surge of pride. Jack looked distinctly uncomfortable under the spotlight, but there was no denying the strength and humility he exuded. It was hard not to admire him. As the crowd dispersed, Emma approached him cautiously, unsure if he'd want company after such an intense day. "Hey," she said softly, falling into step beside him. "How are you holding up?" Jack glanced at her, his expression guarded but softening slightly when he recognized her. "Honestly, I've been better," he admitted with a wry chuckle. "All this attention, it's a lot to take in." "I can imagine," Emma replied sympathetically. "But they're just showing their appreciation. They wouldn't be here if it weren't for you." Jack shrugged, clearly uneasy with the idea of being celebrated. "It doesn't change anything. Those pilots, they're the real heroes. They risk their lives every day flying planes full of strangers. I got lucky." Emma studied him thoughtfully. There was something deeply admirable about his modesty, but also heartbreaking. It was as though he didn't believe he was worthy of recognition, a stark contrast to the courage he had displayed earlier. She wondered what experiences had shaped him into the man standing before her, hesitant to accept even the smallest bit of praise. "You know," she said after a pause, "you don't have to carry this alone. You saved us. Let us thank you for that." Her words lingered between them, simple yet profound. Jack didn't respond immediately, but the faintest hint of a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Thanks, Emma," he said quietly. "That means a lot." They walked together in companionable silence, heading toward the main terminal where taxis and rideshare drivers waited. Along the way, more passengers stopped Jack to express their gratitude, each interaction leaving him increasingly drained. By the time they reached the curb, he looked ready to collapse. "Do you need a ride?" Emma asked suddenly, surprising herself with the offer. "I can drop you off wherever you're staying." Jack hesitated, glancing at the line of cabs idling nearby. Normally, he would have declined, preferring to handle things on his own. But something about Emma's presence put him at ease. She wasn't pushy or demanding. Instead, she radiated kindness and understanding, qualities he rarely encountered in others. "That'd be great, actually," he said finally, giving her a grateful nod. "If you don't mind." "Not at all," Emma replied with a smile. "Come on, my car's parked just outside." The drive was peaceful, a welcome reprieve from the chaos of the past few hours. Emma navigated the road skillfully, occasionally stealing glances at Jack in the passenger seat. He stared out the window, lost in thought, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee. Though he seemed relaxed, she could sense the weight still lingering beneath the surface. "So," she began gently, breaking the quiet, "what's next for you? Are you planning to stick around Miami for a bit?" Jack turned to look at her, surprised by the question. "I hadn't really thought about it," he admitted. "I live in Chicago, so I'll probably head back home once everything settles down." Emma nodded, processing his response. Part of her hoped he might consider staying longer, though she knew it wasn't fair to expect anything from him. After all, they had only met hours ago, and their connection, while undeniably strong, was still new. "Well, if you ever decide to visit again, let me know," she said casually, masking her disappointment with a playful tone. "I owe you dinner, at the very least." Jack chuckled softly, the sound warm and genuine. "Dinner sounds nice," he agreed. "Though I think I should be the one treating you, considering everything." "Deal," Emma replied, smiling brightly. "We'll call it even." As they pulled up to Jack's hotel, he thanked her once more, his gratitude evident in both his words and his demeanor. Watching him climb out of the car, Emma felt a pang of sadness knowing their time together might end here. But then, just as he closed the door, he leaned down to peer through the window. "Hey, Emma," he called out, his voice hesitant but sincere. "Thanks for sticking around tonight. It meant a lot." Emma grinned, her heart skipping a beat. Anytime, Jack. Take care of yourself, okay? With that, he stepped back, waving as she drove away. Standing on the sidewalk, he watched until her taillights disappeared into the distance. For the first time since the ordeal began, he allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this chance encounter wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something unexpected, and perhaps in saving others, he had found a way to save himself too. The next morning, Emma found herself replaying the events of the previous day in her mind as she sipped coffee on the balcony of her father's sprawling Miami estate. The sun was just beginning to rise over the ocean, painting the horizon in hues of orange and pink, but her thoughts were far from peaceful. She couldn't stop thinking about Jack, the man who had risked everything to save her life and the lives of hundreds of others. There was something about him that lingered in her memory, a quiet strength mixed with vulnerability that intrigued her. Her father, Arthur Langley, emerged onto the balcony moments later, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit despite it being early Saturday morning. Arthur was a man of routine, someone who thrived on control and order. His sharp blue eyes scanned Emma's face, noticing the distant look in her gaze. "You seem troubled," he said, his tone gentle yet probing. "Is everything all right?" Emma hesitated, unsure how much to share. Her relationship with her father had always been complicated. He was a self-made millionaire known for his ruthless business tactics and larger-than-life persona, qualities that often clashed with Emma's more empathetic nature. But after their recent meeting, she felt they were slowly bridging the gap between them. Taking a deep breath, she decided to open up. "It's about the flight yesterday," she began, setting her mug down on the table. "There was an emergency. The pilots. One had a heart attack and the other collapsed too. We almost didn't make it." Arthur's expression shifted instantly, concern replacing his usual composed demeanor. "What do you mean, almost?" he asked sharply, leaning forward slightly. "Were you hurt? Did something happen?" No, I'm fine," Emma assured him quickly. "But there was this man, a passenger named Jack. He used to be a pilot in the military, and when no one else could step up, he took control of the plane. He landed us safely." Arthur sat back, visibly processing what he'd heard, his brow furrowed as he absorbed the gravity of the situation. "That's incredible," he murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. "A civilian landing a commercial airliner? How is that even possible?" Emma smiled faintly, recalling the chaos and heroism of those tense moments. "I don't know how he did it, Dad. All I know is that he saved my life and everyone else is on board. Without him, I don't think we would have made it." For a moment, Arthur remained silent, his fingers drumming lightly against the armrest of his chair. Then, as if struck by a sudden realization, he leaned forward again, his voice tinged with urgency. "Do you know where he is now? Can we find him?" Emma blinked, caught off guard by her father's intensity. "Why? What are you thinking?" Arthur sighed, choosing his words carefully. "Emma, this man risked his life for you, for all of you. That kind of bravery deserves recognition. I want to meet him, to thank him personally." Emma hesitated, torn between excitement and apprehension. On one hand, introducing Jack to her father could give him the acknowledgement he deserved. On the other hand, she knew Arthur wasn't the type to simply say thank you and move on. If he met Jack, there was a good chance he'd try to do something grand, something Jack might not appreciate. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," she said cautiously. "Jack doesn't seem like the kind of person who wants attention or favors. He's humble almost to a fault." Arthur raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement flickering across his face. "Humble people still need help sometimes, Emma. Besides, I didn't build my fortune by standing idly by when someone needed support. Let me at least talk to him. If nothing else, I owe him that much." Emma chewed her lip thoughtfully, weighing her options. She trusted her father's intentions, but she also understood Jack's aversion to the spotlight. Still, something inside her whispered that this might be worth pursuing, not just for Jack's sake, but for her own. Maybe bringing these two men together could lead to something meaningful. "All right," she relented finally. "I'll reach out to him and see if he's willing to meet you." But promise me you won't overwhelm him, okay? He's been through a lot." Arthur nodded solemnly, though the gleam in his eye suggested he already had plans forming in his mind. "You have my word. Now tell me more about this man. What's he like?" Later that afternoon, Emma sent Jack a text message, inviting him to meet her for coffee. She kept the tone casual, not wanting to pressure him into agreeing. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with a reply. "Sure, I can meet you tomorrow. Same place as last night?" Relieved, Emma confirmed the plan and then called her father to update him. "He said yes," she announced, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice. "We're meeting tomorrow afternoon." "Excellent," Arthur replied, his tone betraying his eagerness. "I'll make sure I'm available. Just let me know where and when." The following day, Emma arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, her nerves buzzing with anticipation. Jack appeared shortly after, looking more relaxed than he had the previous evening. He greeted her warmly, his smile genuine as he slid into the seat across from her. "You didn't have to come all the way out here again," he said, gesturing toward the bustling cafe. "I hope this isn't inconvenient." "Not at all," Emma replied, smiling back. "Actually, there's a reason I asked you to meet me. My dad, he really wanted to thank you in person. He's waiting outside right now. Would you mind if he joined us?" Jack's expression shifted immediately, a flicker of unease crossing his features. "Your dad? Emma, I don't know." "He's not going to bite," she teased gently, sensing his hesitation. "He just wants to say thank you. Trust me, he's harmless." After a brief pause, Jack nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but only because it's you asking." Emma waved her father over, and Arthur approached the table with a confident stride. Dressed in a crisp navy blazer and slacks, he exuded authority, yet his smile was warm and inviting. "Mr. Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Arthur Langley, Emma's father. It's an honor to meet you." Jack shook his hand firmly, though his posture remained guarded. "The honor's mine, sir, though I'm not sure I did anything special." Arthur chuckled softly, pulling out a chair to sit beside them. "Modesty suits you, young man, but don't undersell yourself. You saved my daughter's life and countless others. For that, I'll always be grateful." The conversation flowed naturally from there, with Arthur skillfully steering the discussion toward Jack's background. He learned about Jack's time in the military, his struggles adjusting to civilian life, and his current work as a mechanic. Jack spoke candidly, though he seemed wary of revealing too much. Despite his reservations, he couldn't deny the sincerity in Arthur's gratitude. As the meeting drew to a close, Arthur leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Jack, I'd like to offer you something, not as repayment but as a gesture of appreciation. If there's anything I can do to help you, whether it's financial support, career opportunities, or simply advice, I want you to know that I'm here." Jack stiffened slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the offer. "Sir, I appreciate the thought, but I don't take charity. I've always handled things on my own." "I understand," Arthur replied smoothly. "This isn't charity, it's an investment. In someone who has proven themselves capable of greatness under pressure. Think about it, Jack. Sometimes accepting help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom." Emma watched the exchange closely, holding her breath as Jack processed Arthur's words. Finally, he nodded slowly, his guard lowering just a fraction. "I'll think about it," he said quietly. "Thank you, Mr. Langley." As they parted ways, Emma felt a sense of hope blooming within her. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. Jack's journey was far from over, and neither was hers. Weeks passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm for both Jack and Emma. The chaos of the emergency landing had faded into memory, replaced by quieter moments that allowed them to reflect on what had happened and where they wanted to go from here. For Jack, the meeting with Arthur Langley lingered in his mind like an unanswered question. He wasn't used to people offering him help without expecting something in return, especially not someone as influential as Arthur. It made him uneasy, but it also planted a seed of possibility, a chance to rebuild his life in ways he hadn't considered before. Emma, meanwhile, found herself thinking about Jack more often than she cared to admit. Their brief interactions had left a lasting impression on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were meant to cross again. She admired his humility and courage, qualities that seemed rare in the world today. But beyond that, there was something deeper, a connection she couldn't quite explain. Every text or phone call between them felt meaningful, even if they only talked about mundane things like work or weather. One evening, as Emma sat in her father's study going over some paperwork, Arthur walked in carrying a glass of scotch. He settled into the chair across from her, studying her thoughtfully. "You've been distant lately," he observed, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Is everything okay?" Emma looked up, startled by the comment. "I'm fine, Dad. Just busy." Arthur raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Busy thinking about that young man, perhaps? Her cheeks flushed instantly, though she tried to play it cool. "What makes you say that?" He chuckled softly, taking a sip of his drink. "Come now, Emma. You think I don't notice these things? Ever since that day at the cafe, you've been different. Happier, I'd say. And I can't blame you. Jack seems like a remarkable person." Emma sighed, setting down her pen. There was no point denying it. Her father always saw right through her. "He is remarkable," she admitted quietly. "But I don't know where we stand. We're still getting to know each other." "And how does he feel about you?" Arthur pressed gently, his curiosity genuine. "I'm not sure," Emma replied. "Honestly. We haven't talked about it, but I think maybe he feels the same way." Arthur nodded thoughtfully, leaning back in his chair. "Well, if there's anything I've learned in my years, it's that life is too short to leave things unsaid. If you care about him, don't wait too long to tell him." Meanwhile, Jack was grappling with his own thoughts. After much deliberation, he decided to take Arthur up on his offer. Not because he needed money, but because he saw an opportunity to turn his passion for aviation into something meaningful. With Arthur's support, he began drafting plans for a small aviation repair shop aimed at helping veterans transition back into civilian life. It would provide training programs, job opportunities, and a sense of community for those struggling with PTSD or unemployment, issues Jack understood all too well. When he shared the idea with Emma during one of their calls, she lit up with excitement. "That's incredible, Jack," she exclaimed. "It sounds exactly like something you'd do, helping others while doing what you love." "Yeah, well, your dad inspired me," Jack admitted, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. "He made me realize I don't have to do this alone. Sometimes asking for help isn't weakness, it's strength." Emma smiled warmly, touched by his honesty. "I'm proud of you, Jack. Really proud." The compliment caught him off guard, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. Instead, he changed the subject. "So, how are things with you? Still dealing with your dad's empire?" Emma laughed lightly. "Something like that. Though I think I'm starting to find my place in it. Maybe I'll join forces with you someday. Invest in your business or something." Jack smirked, pretending to consider it. I'll have to think about that. Can't promise you won't end up covered in grease, though." Their banter continued until late into the night, leaving both of them smiling long after they hung up. Over time, their conversations grew longer and more frequent, each interaction bringing them closer together. They started meeting regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for dinner, and gradually their friendship blossomed into something deeper. One sunny afternoon, Jack invited Emma to visit the site of his future repair shop. It was a modest building tucked away near the edge of town, surrounded by open fields and endless blue skies. As they stood outside, gazing at the structure, Jack turned to her with a hopeful expression. "This is it," he said, gesturing toward the building. "This is where it all starts." Emma looked at him, her heart swelling with admiration. "It's perfect," she replied softly. "Just like you." Her words hung in the air, causing Jack to pause. He studied her face, searching for any hint of hesitation or jest, but all he saw was sincerity. Slowly, he reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. "Emma," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to say." She held her breath, waiting. "You've changed my life," he continued, his gaze steady. "Before that flight, I was just surviving. But now, thanks to you, I feel like I'm living again. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. I want you in it." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she squeezed his hand, tightly. "I want that too, Jack. More than anything." They embraced then, the world around them fading into the background. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the past, not the challenges ahead, just the two of them and the promise of a shared future. Months later, Jack's aviation repair shop opened its doors, becoming a beacon of hope for veterans and aspiring pilots alike. Emma joined him in running the business, using her organizational skills to manage operations while Jack focused on mentoring newcomers. Together, they built something extraordinary, a place where people could heal, grow, and chase their dreams. As they stood side by side on the tarmac one crisp autumn morning, watching planes take off and land, Jack slipped an arm around Emma's shoulders. "You know," he said with a grin, "I never thought I'd be grateful for a plane crash, but here we are." Emma laughed, leaning into him. "Funny how life works, isn't it? Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best beginnings." And with that, they turned their attention back to the horizon, ready to face whatever came next, together.